Welcome to In Session Taking Back Control. This podcast contains discussions on topics related to mental health, which may include sensitive and potentially triggering information regarding violence, abuse, addictions, and other mental health conditions. The experiences shared by our guests are personal and represent their individual perspectives. They have voluntarily agreed to share their stories with the aim of fostering understanding and awareness. The content of this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. It is not a substitute for seeking professional help, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified mental health professional for any concerns or questions related to your health and well-being. Listener discretion is advised. If you find any content distressing, we encourage you to pause the episode and seek support from a trusted individual or a mental health professional. Thank you for listening to In Session Taking Back Control, and we hope that the conversations that we share contribute to a deeper understanding of mental health. Okay, welcome Kevin to In Session Taking Back Control. I appreciate you taking the time to come and spend it with me in session. So just before we get started, would you mind taking a wee minute just for anybody that doesn't know you, just to introduce yourself a wee bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, first of all, Declan, thanks for inviting me on. So for those who don't know me, my name is Kevin Neary. I'm the co-founder of a charity, Aid Abet. It's a peer-led charity for with people with past lived experience of the criminal justice system and substance use, mental health, and we're a charity that supports people leaving prison for the gate to help them reintegrate, transition back to like prison life into society again, and show them pathways and get them to walk through doors that they don't need to actually need to return back to prison again. So that's who I am. The co-founder of that. There was a few years that came together to create the charity. There's only like 2 years about the day, that's still there with the charity, and we've been quite passionate. It's been about 10 years now since we kicked off.
Brilliant. And I know about the charity myself because we've kind of spoken at length a few times about the things that we can do to collaborate, and I think we'll come on to Aid in a wee bit more later on. But what I often ask guests is we sometimes know people where they are in the here and now, and maybe what some of their plans are for the future, but to get to where we are, we have to look back to where we've been, and part of that is where I'll ask you to go now. So, would you mind going back and telling us about wee Kevin? So, what was life like for wee Kevin back in the day? What did it look like?
I'll go back to the day I was born, Declan, because it was Mother's Day Sunday, 24th of March, 1968.
Right.
My mum always tells a brilliant story where at the time, expecting mothers and that smoked in the bed in the hospital. And she just had me and my dad came to the hospital and gave her a choice of a bunch of flowers or 10 woodbine fags. And she wanted the woodbine fags. And she says she needed 6 weeks rest before she had me. And that she always says that today, So that was that. And I came into the family as number 7. Above me I had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. So I was number 7. And I returned back to a 1-bedroom, what they called a single end in Glasgow, in Pomady. It was a single end, so it was a bedroom, living room and kitchen in the top of a tenement flat, and 7 years lived there. So I don't have I've vague memories of being a child there. There was an outside toilet. You had to go downstairs to use the toilet outside and stuff like that. I've got a scary memory that, being in that toilet and there was a guy looking through a skylight at me as a wee boy, and it terrified me, and it actually affected me later on in life. I didn't realise that only a few years ago I found out why, but I'll maybe come to that. But if you can remind me to come back to that. But he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't a predator. He wasn't in that. He was actually stealing the lead and the copper off the roof, and he just happened to be looking in. And I've looked up, and as a 2-year-old, I was 2. That's the memory of being a 2-year-old, and I ran off that toilet and up the stairs screaming, and so that was a memory then. And then, we moved from there. My younger sister was born, So she was number 8, and she was born in a house. And during that time as well, although I don't have the memory of it, what my mum and dad talks about is like there was no electricity. You know what I mean? My dad knocked a wall down through to the next house to give us extra bedrooms, and it was just, I can only imagine chaos that time and stuff. And you know, we left Pomady and we moved to Govan in Glasgow, and that's where I started school. You know, and I always remember my first day at school like yesterday. You know what I mean? That excitement, because I see my brothers going to school and I wanted to get to school. I was that excited and so, you know, full of life, bouncing about, and you know, and that first day at school, I always remember sitting in the classroom. My mum was at my side, and all these kids were all crying, and I'm like, why are they all crying? Like, you know, why are they not happy? Like, this is like, you know, this was amazing. And in that time at school, you know, on reflection, looking back, you know, as I started school, you know, I do school, white shirt and all that stuff and that, but that white shirt became grey. You know, the shoes I was wearing on my feet became holes in them. You know, I was going to school, but I was happy with that environment and where I was living. That looking back on it, it must have been difficult, but I always wanted to go to school. And you know, my teacher was Miss Hart, or Mrs. Hart, Miss Hart. I'll never forget this. And they saw how I was coming to school, and it was the very first time I was ever in a car, and they took me out of school, put me in a car, and drove me into Glasgow city centre and bought me a new pair of shoes and socks, and sent a letter, maybe a letter saying to my mum, and hope she wasn't offended, that she realised that she had a big family, and they knew I was coming to school every day with these burst shoes. My socks were coming, poking through the holes in the shoes in the pouring of rain, but I just wanted to get to school. And that was that. And you know, it was difficult for my parents at that time as well. And I've spoken to other platforms as well, and I talk about the environment I lived in. And you know, my parents were the most loving, caring parents who committed themselves to the whole family. However, the stress on them two was phenomenal. You know, it was phenomenal looking back at what they had to put up with. My dad didn't have mates. He didn't go to the pub. He didn't jump about with anybody. He stuck with his family. But him and my mum would have a drink, and all the stuff that happened through the week would come out in domestics. You know what I mean? And I was living in that environment where they would start, you know, being aggressive with each other and stuff like that. So that was an environment I grew up in. But I understand the day, and it's not to excuse domestic violence or anything like that. It's or a verbal abuse. It was what happened then, how they coped with stress and trauma in their lives, and how they had to navigate 9 kids with absolutely nothing and get by. And they stuck together till my dad passed away just a couple of years ago. They stuck with it, you know what I mean? And that's what true parenting was, even though they went through what they went through. And I like to emphasise that, because I talk about being brought up in a family household where there was domestic violence, but there was more love in that household than anything else. However, these events did happen. These events did result in possibly where a lot of fear came into my life, and how that manifested within me, you know. And then we moved from Glasgow to West Lothian, and that was an absolute culture shock. And it was only 26 miles along the road, but to me it was another world. It was another country. There was a language barrier, you know. And I see this everywhere I go. For me, it was my experience that I came into West Lothian, and they used a different language for what we did in Glasgow. You know what I mean? I was introduced to Ken, Ben, and Barry. You know, I didn't Ken, go Ben, and that's effing Barry. You know, and I struggled with that Ken and Ben stuff. Go Ben this, and I didn't Ken that. And you know, I said stare, they said stare. I said hair, they said hair. I said totties, they said tatties. There was just all this. I got bullied for it.
Right.
And at that time, I never got told I was moving to West Lothian. My mum and dad backed up, and here we came through. I found out later on in life that my dad had wanted us out of there because all the young boys in the street in Govan were in Bostels, and he didn't want his sons all going down that road, so he wanted us all out. So he made it happen, so to speak. He made it happen, and we came to West Lothian. But for me, it was traumatic because I loved my school. I loved everything. I was new in this new place. I was new going into a new school. Actually, the new school was about 20 metres along the road there. And that new school, and I'll never forget the day I went in there, and you know, my dad was taking my two older brothers are twins, and then there's the other two are older than that. And he was taking us into each primary class, and he took me into mine. And I'll never forget, it was Mrs. Finlay. I'll never forget it, who I know her son today is an amazing man. and Neil Finlay. So Neil Finlay was a year younger than me at school, but it was Mrs. Finlay, and I always remember sitting in the classroom, and my dad's out in it was like a kind of hut in the playground, this classroom, and my dad's talking to the teacher, and I'm sitting in the middle row, and I'm just sitting there, and it's just silence, and I'm just looking in the middle row, and I'm just looking left and right, and a voice says, "What team do you support?" I'm like, "Shh, Celtic or Rangers, Celtic or Rangers." That's all I ever knew. I stayed in Govan. It was at Ibrox. It was Rangers football, but I'm not a Rangers supporter, right? But I'm sitting going Celtic Rangers. I'm having to think fast on my feet as a wee boy, think fast to fit into the school. Celtic Rangers, and I went Rangers, and one person went yes, and I knew I was in a Catholic school. That's how quick I had to weigh that up, and that's the journey started from there. I hated the school. I struggled with teachers. I struggled with education. I struggled with a lot in school, not realising that, due to the events that happened in childhood was having an impact on my development in my brain, which gave me answers later on in life. Obviously, through in life, I look back on that and I see what was happening there. And I still struggle today. I still struggle, but I couldn't retain information for a teacher or anybody. I couldn't retain an instruction or follow a procedure. And the teacher saw that as somebody who wasn't the one to learn, who wasn't the one to listen. I got shouted at and bawled at, and so much so that I got so stressed that I would act out. I would act out my frustration. I would sit when the book was coming round. I always tell this because you can't change your story, can you? It's always it's the same story. It doesn't change because it's what happened, and it's each child's reading a part of the book, and it's coming round to me, and I don't even know where I am. I don't even know where it is, the book, and I'm looking. I can see it's getting closer and closer, and I'm getting a physiological response, and I'm sweating and I'm shaking, and I need to get out. I need to get out the classroom. I need to get out. And what the teacher saw was bad behaviour. She saw bad behaviour. And as much as the household I was brought up in, there was a lot of love. There was a lot of arguments and shouting and bawling, but one thing never happened to us is my parents never lifted their hands to me or my brothers and sisters, ever. And now I have a teacher taking me out on the classroom floor and not just humiliating me, but assaulting me with a belt. And that was the end of it for me. That's when school ended in primary 4. That's when school ended for me. I rebelled for that day onwards, and fast forward that to secondary school. We spend all day talking about school, but into secondary school, I made it to third year. But by the time I got to first year, second year, 1982, they banned the belt. So that was good, they banned the belt, so they weren't assaulting me anymore. But what they decided to do was to exclude me. Tell me, the message they told me was, "You're not part of us, you'll never be part of us." So that was the message I was fed for years. So I was rebellious. And I was kicked out of school in third year. I'm on the streets, and my peers are now 17 and 18, and I'm 14, 15. So there's my new educators, there's my new teachers. That's where I'm going. And it's no long before, and I always talk about this as well, as when, my first drink, because, I always swore I'd never drink. I would never use alcohol, never have my life use alcohol, because I saw the carnage and damage that it ever done. I never saw a happy party, but what I saw was carnage. And then one night, and it wasn't, peer pressure, wasn't it? People pressuring me. I was pressured to be like them. I wanted to fit in with them. So if they'd done something, I wanted to fit in with them. So nobody was actually forcing drink on me. I forced myself into the peers. That was the pressure, to force myself in there and take a drink. And the effects of that alcohol that night was just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I still remember that first drink, as I remember first to everything. And that's when my journey with alcohol started. My behaviour got worse than alcohol. And as I say, I kicked out of school in third year. Fast forward to like 17, 16, tensions with the police. Mid court time of 16, 17, Parliament young offenders 17, 18, 19, adult prisons 21, and then so on. And the progression of alcohol led to cannabis, glue sniffing, prescription pills. Always say no any particular prescription pill. Anything that said on the box, do not drive or operate machinery may cause drowsiness. I would eat them. I knew that message on that box told me this is going to change the way I feel. This is going to take me out of my nut. I'm going to get out of my nut. Virtually away from all my thinking and all my fears and all my insecurities. These tablets do that for me. Alcohol does that for me. Glue sniffing does that to me. Makes me another person. Even back at school when I talk about where I just wanted to be everybody else but me. I wanted to walk like him. I wanted to talk like him. I wanted to be everybody else. I didn't know at a very young age at school I was losing myself. I was losing myself then, and then I started to lose myself even deeper in substance use, and then I look at back and it's like roughly 30 years, and it wasn't all just criminal justice and drug abuse and all that, but within that 30 years of my life, there was drinking, drugging, and criminality. And then out of many jobs in my life, escalation for prescription pills to amphetamines to ecstasy to cocaine to every drug. I can name 2 drugs for every letter of the alphabet. Every letter of the alphabet, I can name 2 drugs, right up to Z for amitriptyline to zopicon. You know what I mean? On the prescription side, you know what I mean? Or amphetamines, you know what I mean? But I think I tried everything. And then it resulted in my prison sentences were short term, for instance, and it led to long term, which my last prison sentence was long term prison sentence. And I tried many times to stop using drugs, tried many times. And I actually took a prison officer in prison that done an intervention on me at the age of 40 years of age. I was, I think, because it was just before my 40th birthday, he done an intervention where he invited me onto a cognitive group, CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, but it didn't mean nothing to me. But the concept meant everything to me. Because what he told me was, he says, Kevin, this course, it's about how you think, how you feel, how you act. He says, everything you think about has been negative. You act negative, you feel negative, and so you act it out. And it just hit me like that. Absolute boom. I just realised I've been bonkers thinking all my life. Yeah. About myself, about others, how I see the world. If I can only change that thinking process, if I can only change that, I can make myself feel better. Maybe I can act better. And that was the start of our journey. Mark, I'll never forget Mark, that prison officer, I have met him since, who was an inspiration to me to just, basically saying, are you okay? Can I help you? He didn't say it like that, but his actions said all that, And I was still dabbling about in jail with drugs at the time, and I remember phoning my dad, and there was ways and means of getting your drugs paid for and acquire them in prison. And I made a phone call to my dad and asked him would he transfer money for me. And I'll never forget the tone of his voice on the phone. Many times he was sick of me. Many times he'd like, no. Many times the family had to separate themselves from me. I couldn't go to weddings or parties or stuff like that because of my behaviour, because of my, that stuff that I divorced myself from. Because it's that. And at this time on the phone, and I'm in prison, and he says, this is the last time I'm ever going to do this for you, but there was something different in his voice. And he meant it. I'll never forget it. I mean, I'm in a hallway, Scotland's hardest, you know what I mean? And I'm trying to play the hard guy too, right? And then I'm sliding down the walk in tears, in absolute tears, right? Because I knew what he meant. He had enough. He'd sick of it. And I always say that I was convicted for robberies, and I think the biggest robbery I ever committed in my life was robbing my parents of their peace of mind, robbing everybody of their peace of mind. That was the biggest robbery that I'll pay back for the rest of my life, was robbing them of their peace of mind. And that's where the journey started when my dad said that on the phone, and I came off drugs and I came off stuff in the jail, and I was transferred to Norton Estate prison in Dundee, and I done really well up there, and my family's all back in, and they've all got Kev back, and my sister's got her Kev back, and everybody's happy and delighted, and I'm happy and delighted because I just want to show them, but I didn't know what was due to happen to me. I didn't know that when I come out of prison that stress is going to hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't know that because I've been getting my breakfast, lunch and dinner served to me. I've had a roof over my head. I've had a bed to go. I've had my washings done for me. I've done everything. The jail's done everything to know where with my living skills. And I come out into society and I've got to do that myself. Overwhelmed within 3 days, I was injecting heroin again. And then I nearly died twice through overdose, not non-intentional overdose. It was the same guy that saved me twice. And even after I near died, it didn't stop me from going doing it again because I wasn't intending to die. But I knew every time I was taking a shot could be my last time. I knew I might not waking up, but I was doing it anyway. And then I met another beautiful human being who's no longer with us today, a guy called John Clusker, who met me by a fluke, by an absolute fluke, because he was a key worker for an organisation called Sirenians, and
Right.
he was a key worker, and I was actually trying to get a flat and somewhere to stay, and then I seen all this stuff about recovery and addiction and all that, and so I asked to see this worker. Well, I didn't ask to see him, I just asked to see a worker, and I remember John coming in, and he, a big tall guy like myself, glasses, shirt and that, and he took me into a room and he starts talking to me about drug addiction and when did I start using drugs, and he asked me all the same questions that everybody else has asked me for years, and a drug diary and the type of process they go through to try and get a picture of you. But to me that was nothing. I've heard this all my life, and I says, no, forget it, mate. You don't get me. just forget it. And I went to walk out, and he said, Kev. And I turned round and was looking at his face, and he says, go and shut the door and come back and give me 2 minutes. Please just give me 2 minutes. And there was desperation on his face.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked back here and sat in the chair, and I looked at him, and I'm like, what? He went, it was the first time I heard the word boundaries, right? First time I've heard the term boundaries. And he says, listen, he says, I might lose my job for this. He says, because I am breaching professional boundaries here. He says, but I'm a recovering heroin addict. And I done that in the chair, stared at him. And he looked at me and he says, stick with me, big man, stick with me. He says, get yourself into recovery, but you stick with me. He says, and I guarantee you, doors will open in your life. Just stick with me. And he couldn't have spoke a truer word. Do you know what I mean? And he spent 2 years, as I always say, John loved me with action, right? Never forced me, never with me. Actually used what he done for me, I do with others a day. And he never forced me, never told me what to do, but he would always suggest and drop these seeds and plant me things with me. He would say, "Do I go to rehab?" And I'd be like, "No." "Do I go to rehab?" I'd be walking along the street and the car would pull up, and it was me, John, the window down. "All right, Kev, all right, John, do I go to rehab?" "No." And I used to joke and say, "You open the fridge and there's John in it. Do I go to rehab?" You know what I mean? Open your coffee and there's his wee face in the coffee. You do I go to rehab? And because he was that kindly dipping it in, and then one day I wanted to go to rehab, and I phoned him, and he took me. And again, breaching another professional boundary. I could see this because he's no ways a day. He sadly died of a terminal illness. Very young man too. But even then, he knew I had no money, and you're not supposed to give people money. And that.
Aye.
He just believed in me, and he was like, "Here, take that." And I'm like, looking at him, and I knew he wasn't meant to give me it. And he's like, "I'll get it off you another time," and which I did give him it back. But these were the type of boundaries he bent.
Aye.
You know, he bent them. And I went into rehab, and then I would say rehab was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, because in prison, they have the key. They have the key in prison, you can't get out. In rehab, I had the key. I had to stay there. I could leave any day, any minute I wanted, and that was the hardest thing to do, was to keep myself there. So that was that, the journey, and then I came out there and started a new way of life, and that's where Aid Abet kind of flourished up for, using the same sort of principles as the recovery journey, and the principles within the 12 steps and the 12 traditions and the 12 principles. We kind of adapted some of that, and we use that within Aid Abet, because there's no managers and bosses and leaders and all that. There's, we all work together. There's no hierarchy. We created that right away. We have a board of trustees who look after us financially and legally. It keeps us grounded, gives us a foundation. However, everybody's equal in all rights and all ways, and everybody's different skills and different abilities, and it's been great to be part of it, really. So that's the journey for Mother's Day Sunday, 24th of March 1968, to the present day of the 23rd of August 2024.
Firstly, thanks for sharing all that, because it's and I know you talk about this quite openly and with candour whenever you're talking to groups, and you speak to large quantities of people at auditoriums and colleges and different things. But I think that there's a vulnerability in that, and and I know you're used to saying it, but there's that part that it's the learning that can be in this for other people as well. Because you talked about stuff like addiction and the journey in addiction and crime, but you said that during your conversation there, that a lot of this has kind of been fed from childhood, and we've talked before about what people will now know as adverse childhood experiences. But if you were to describe ACEs, what is known as ACEs, how would you describe ACEs, and how can that unfold for people in their adulthood?
When I first got brought into the ACEs movement in Scotland, the ACE Aware Nation stuff, it just so happened that I was talking in front of the audiences, and talking, and the reason I share my story, and people say like, "Oh, you're oversharing your story, or you're oversharing that," but to me, it was a healing process. It was healing, because I wasn't affecting me anymore. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't feeling guilty what happened. I wasn't blaming my mum and dad anymore. I didn't need to blame anybody. For me, it was a healing, and it was a forgiving. It was all that stuff all in one. But I was speaking like this, and I didn't know that I was speaking about adverse childhood experiences. I was actually saying all this, but didn't know it came under the term of adverse childhood experiences. So what the ACEs done for me was actually give me a kind of language to kind of more articulate an understanding through the science here. However, we know that everybody Because when we watched the film Resilience by James Redford, you know, and it was featured in the Gene Buck Harris and the scientist guys, forget their names, but it doesn't matter. Off that, there was a science and a study and I counted 10 numbers and all that stuff, right? And yeah, I get it. And the whole point it was if the whole point of that film was you're not born with resilience.
Yeah.
You're not born, none of us are born with resilience. It's built into us. It's built into us and it's built into us through life. So in some senses, you can look at your life and say, well, I was asked at Dundee University, what would you change in your life today? And I thought about it for a few minutes and went, not 1 second. Not 1 second. Because if I changed anything, I wouldn't be standing here today. So maybe, you know, in my experience, it was meant to happen. However, that I didn't go through. There's people out there who have experienced some traumatic, horrible, nasty experiences in life. Let me assure you that it's damaging. But it's the point is the resiliency and the evidence of that film and the science was saying that if you have one positive person in your life, you know that you know that can help you through it. And I've seen that more and more over the years than people talking about, oh, my traumas. I see people talking about, I've been through all the traumas and I'm standing here strong today. And it's great to see that there's, because we all have at one time in our lives experienced some traumatic event. And I think the biggest one, Declan, need to really talk about a lot is bereavement and loss.
Yeah.
Is the biggest adversity and that can happen in a child's life. And so it doesn't need to be the physical abuse. It doesn't need to be the psychological abuse in a sense. But I mean, the bereavement side of things is psychological in a sense. You know what I mean? And it affects you. But then there's all that. But the ACEs stuff gave me a language that I could use to articulate more. You know, but there's I get the biopsychosocial model is kind of, that's how that's based on it. Like, you know what I mean? They looked at the 10 things, but they're in different categories. But it was just to emphasise it. The only thing I didn't like about the AC stuff is then people were trying to use a study of 10, marking people up for 10 and that, and I absolutely disagreed with that. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, absolutely no way. And it's just, for me, it was about bringing that we don't need to feel alone anymore. That was the whole point of ACs, is everyone has experienced something. Everyone has experienced sadness and happiness and fear and anxiety, and we all go through that. And it's to be able to be able to openly talk about it. And I think that is the whole thing for me with trauma. You know, there's people who, you know, just because it's basically right new, right? There's guys who work in emergency services, and there's people recovering bodies via a sunken ship right now. And you know, very rich people, and sadly they've lost their lives, and they rescuers and all services are experiencing traumatic events happening in front of their eyes. Traffic cops see some of the most horrific scenes. You know, we forget about firefighters, miss and see. You know, we talk about the soldiers who go to war and what they see, but what they always miss out is, and that comes under the PTSD, but this comes under trauma. But nobody really talks about children, and they don't talk about that, and that's so widespread, the ACEs. And for me to define it down to anything, I mean, I can't even define it to anything. I believe it's life. But within life, it's human connection and it's human support, and it's about the kindness and care and compassion of others that can pick somebody else up that's down. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's how I'd best sort of describe it in a sense, because I couldn't just say, oh, well, ACEs is just one thing and it's just focused on that. It's all over. And I think it's just about the key word in it all is about awareness and being able to be aware of what the ACEs study and the science really what it means.
Do you know, you make a good point there, because I think whenever we're talking about things like trauma and ACEs, and you know, and you hear a lot about trauma informed and trauma aware at the minute and stuff, but I think you're right. It's that point of, it's really about that do no harm, and if we can be that person that supports that other person who's in need, you know, like your teacher who put you in the car for the first time, took you and got you shoes and socks and whatever else, they were that person, you know, and later on in life, the person who was trying to get you into recovery. And you know, that we find these people along the journey, and you're right, grief and loss is, it's the one constant in life for all of us. You know, none of us can escape it. You know, you felt grieving for Govan when you moved to West Lothian. You know, you were in a process of grief and loss from losing probably a social circle, friends, family possibly. And then you have to process grief while also firefighting as well, and trying to keep yourself safe in an environment where if I say the wrong thing here, what's going to happen? You know, and that's life, like you say. There's parts of life where you're constantly on that back foot, where you're thinking, how do I keep myself safe and those around me? But when we're talking about trauma and being trauma informed, it really is about how do we do no harm and be inclusive and just be a
Yeah.
wee bit more open in what we're thinking about and what we're saying.
Yeah, I mean, like when you look at when you talk about the journey, there's many people who, oh, Kev's great. Kev's turned his life. I hear these people going, Kev turned his life around about. Kev turned his life around. And other people pointed me in directions and helped and supported me to turn my life around because I didn't certainly do this in my way. I mean, and there's actually I talk about a librarian who for Broxburn who to this day doesn't realise the impact she's had in hundreds of lives because she got me a book. And if she hadn't got me that book, I'd never have met John. And I would, you know what I mean? There's so many times where there's people came in and, the simple, I heard they were closing down libraries and I'm like, that's vital. Libraries are vital. They're important places for people, for education, for all sorts of reasons, but also for a human connection. And that librarian, I've never met her. I've never tried to find her. She was in Broxburn in 2012, I would say, around that time. And I went in, I didn't know what I was doing for Declan, but I went in because something in my head kept saying, go to the library, go to the library. I'll call it a spiritual intervention or something. I don't know. It's like, I'm not to explain it, but what happened, I had thought about going to the library at the time. I'd never been to a library in my life, ever. I was back on heroin. I was just before rehab, all that stuff. And I remember going to that library, asking if I was a member. I hadn't been in a library in my life. And then she asked my name and she said, do you want to be a member? Okay, give me a wee card and all that. Go to any library in West Lothian with this card. I'm like, brilliant. And I walked away into this abyss of books. And I'm like up in my head trying to read everything. I didn't even know why I was there. And I went back to the second time and disturbed her a second time and says, and why I ever said it, I don't know, but I says, are you any books in psychology? And she says, yeah. She took me over to these books in psychology and she went from there to their psychology. And I went, right. And I looked at these books and this one book just stuck out to me and it was Face the Fear and Do It Anyway, Susan Jefferson. Right. And I took that book and 2 or 3 others to make myself look good. The sweat round in my neck and all that. And I read that book and that gave me some drive to move where I was and end up in Bathgate and then end up meeting John and then the journey for there. So that librarian actually was a key player. There was a prison officer before her. There's all these people in your journey who just helped and were there to support and you'll see how in some places I use that every act of kindness leaves a trace. And I have badges, Kev Neary, somebody, it was at a prison in Adderall, somebody, because I wrote it in a quote in a book and somebody asked if they could use it, and I says, of course, because they think it's my quote, and it's like, it's just a quote. But apparently it's mine, apparently. And they made badges with every act of kindness leaves a trace, and Kev Neary, and I'll give them out to people, and then now I get them, I give them to school kids and stuff like that. And that stems from that school teacher taking me for the shoes, and then represents everybody else who's just showed that simple act of kindness. It's something you'll not forget. It leaves a trace in you. It leaves something in you to be kind to somebody else. And I think that's what's more infectious. And I suppose that's the stuff that I like to do when I do any kind of work in schools and stuff like that, is to get that message across, which is quite powerful, but it's not getting across enough, which I would like to see more of as in today.
Aye. And you're right. I think, we're so good at seeing the difficult journey that people have been on, and we don't see the people and the hidden people who they probably don't even know they exist, like the librarian. It'd be lovely to see if we could connect you with them, or if we could find them. That'd be amazing.
Yeah,
but
it would be good. Yeah,
but and it's having those small interactions, because life is about relationships. In essence, everything is a relationship, whether it's a relationship with a loved one, a person, a colleague, or a prison officer, a dealer. Everybody has a relationship or a connection. Or is it a connection with a phone or a device, or what relationship do we have? But we all have one with something or someone. But it's how positive is that relationship for us in our circle, and that's where there's things like object relations theory, and they talk about the 7 things that you can be connected to in relationships. So it's 5 plus or minus 2. So that can be anything like, a parent, a grandparent as a child, a dog, and then it eventually, that part when you go to school and you call your teacher mum, or something, and it's really awkward. Everybody laughs at you. It's not like it's not because you don't love your mum anymore, but this person's become a primary caregiver for you. So you start to realise that, in life, our seven within our connection will change and evolve with partners and children and those who care for us, and in that moment in time, it can just slip to be that person who takes you to the psychology section.
Yeah, and I talk about, like, in the relationship side of things, is when I look back on my journey, with parents to school teachers so I had a really, speak of one positive school teacher, but I not that I hated all my school teachers when I came to West Lothian, but I just struggled with trying to learn and how they struggled with me, and they didn't know about trauma, and they didn't know about stuff with ACEs, and they didn't know what teachers do know today. What I've looked back on is the fact that I struggled with my parents at the end. During that, I'd struggled with school teachers, I struggled with police officers, I struggled with prison staff as well, because I'd known very many positive experiences with prison staff. Growing up and going in the system, social workers, judges, sheriffs, any form of authority, there was no relationship there. However, in the space of 10 years, when I changed the way I was thinking and how I felt about the world and how I acted, I then had positive relationships with my parents, positive relationships with school teachers. I get to go into schools. I worked alongside Police Scotland for 5 years, and I kind of engaged on for there to into other organisations, which took me into prison systems as well. I was just talking about having the relationships where, as I say, I'd broken the mob, but then 10 years ago, I started having better relationships with my parents, better relationships with school teachers, relationships with social workers, police officers, prison staff, because I ended up working with Police Scotland for 5 years on a Police Scotland project to early intervention and prevention work. Made great friends there, learned so much, that got me working in schools, that prison officer Marcus spoke about, he was a prison officer that, when they told me about the concept of CBT and all that, I said, I want to take this into schools, and they went, you'll never get to work in schools, big man. You're intravenous heroin addict and that convicted armed robber. You're not getting to work in schools. Yeah. And that stuck in there. And I had this desire to get to schools. And through the result of changing the thinking process, taking the support and help, excuse me, and taking the support and help, that allowed me in schools. I've been to many schools I've been to. It's been unbelievable the amount of schools I've been in around the place, the country. Been all over the country really, but the point being was the relationships. All the relationships I was at war with, I then amended them by giving to these schools, and I got kicked out of school. I've been to many schools. I never got to university. Yeah, I've been to many universities doing lectures and stuff like that. So I got in the back door, and even as a wee boy, I was like, I'd be a police officer in the Mulder. Never got into police, but I ended up working with them. So there's all these wee things that kind of came, and your sort of dreams came true in a sense, or your wishes came true because I changed the way I was thinking. I changed the way I was thinking, the way I was feeling, the way I saw the world, the way I had done that, and then I realised today that is a daily practice dealing with life. You know what I mean? So, but relationships is always key, and it's important. I always try and encourage school kids today to be kind to each other, and to try and look beyond how Sally or Johnny is behaving, but actually, is there something else going on in life? Get curious, get friendly, go and see if you can help. And that brings that closeness together. And one thing I do notice in our Declan as well is I've got two young ones, 8, 9. And they started school. When I was at school, we didn't hug. Nobody hugged and that. Yet there's this new way the kids just naturally got and hug each other. Right. And it's beautiful to watch, and they're all glad to see each other, and they're all hugging and that. Yeah. And I'm like, this is brilliant. Even though they still go through their wee scrapes and bumps and fallouts and stuff like that, which is normal rivalry or try to gain like leadership and that as they grow up and that, and they fall out with friends and fun with friends. They've got a lot more stronger connection to each other as kids, which is really nice to see.
Aye, and it is. It's great that you're in schools, because when I think about the impact that you're having, you have had and will have going forward, not only in schools but, like you say, universities, colleges. I know you speak to professional groups as well, like police, social work. All these people, all these caregivers, and these people that are there to be that person that you talked about. That person who will step in and look after someone whenever they need it, giving them that kind of trauma-informed approach. But you're kind of talking about the changing thoughts, and changing thoughts changes behaviour. And do you think that started I mean, I suppose the first question is, where do you think it started? Did it start with self-discovery, or did it start in rehab? Where did that change point come for you?
I think that was when I was, so that's why I said I wanted to take into schools, because it was such a simple concept, right? When a prison officer, who's a prison officer, he's trained to look you up, he's trained to count numbers, that's all he's there today,
Yeah.
he's doing it, he's took it on board today to deliver his group. When he explained about CBT, which I never got CBT counselling or therapy,
Yeah.
right? It was a concept. It was just that concept to how you think, how you feel, how you act. And we did do stuff round about that as in like as a group, and it was like as prisoners in a prison, like the wing, in a classroom setting. Everybody's egos are massive up here, so nobody's really want to give anything away and stuff like that. But I enjoyed it. But what it done for me is if I thought, now, if somebody had told me that when I was 12, if somebody just came and says how you think, how you feel, how you act at 12, and maybe I got it. And maybe I wouldn't have went on the journey. Maybe if somebody came and spoke to me about why they were taking drugs and why they were subduing an emotional pain, if somebody came and spoke like that to me, so that's when I got it was there. And then the concept came as, I could go and just plant these seeds with people.
Yeah.
And what I never shared with Declan was because the prison officer says to me, Kevin, what makes you think going into schools and talking about Kev and drug addiction and criminality and that, what makes you think that will work? And I told him the snowball story, right? And this is exactly what happened in secondary school. It's in Kent Academy in Blackburn, right? When I did go to school, they'd raised money for the blind, and they brought a gentleman in who was blind. He had his guide dog, and they brought him onto the stage, and he sat at the stage, and he gets presented with a cheque, and we're all clapping. I'm in second year, looking at that, and they asked him some questions, and I'll never forget it. One kid says, "What time is it?" And he does this, and he went 2:30. And everybody checked their watches, but I checked the clock because I didn't ever watch. But I looked like that, and it was 2:30, and I was like, "He just done that." It was 2:30. I was like, "Wow!" And then he was getting that. What's his dog's name? Stuff like that. And then somebody says, "Do you dream?" And he says, "Yeah, I dream." He says, "People born blind don't get visual." He says they get shadows or smell or sound, but they don't get visual. But I get visual because I could see until I was 12. And another kid says, "How did you go blind?" He says, I was on the playground, he says, and I was hitting the head with a snowball and a rock in it, and I hit me in the side of the head, and I went down and I never saw again. And I looked at the prison officer and says, and I stopped flinging snowballs. I says, I stopped flinging snowballs. I says, even to this day, when I see people with snowballs, I constantly think of that blind man for secondary school. So if I can go into a school and talk about thoughts, feelings, behaviours, consequences of your actions, substance use, mental health, how we feel, how we visualise the world, if I can talk like that, it's not just a snowball we're talking about.
Yeah.
This guy told a real story of how he lost his sight, and it had such an impact on me that I stopped flinging snowballs. And that's why, and that's when Mark says, Kevin, you'll never, ever get into working schools, big man. It was after that. And I always talk about when I went to my cell that night and I was lying there and I was thinking about the funerals I'd been to, the friends I'd lost, or people I'd known, and it should didn't need to be like that. Guys that are doing a life sentence and took somebody's life, but they've lost their own life, and I lay there and I cried that night. But the important thing was in my sobbing, I found a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It was then I found a purpose. I wanted to change. I wanted to change because I wanted to get into schools. And obviously there was a bit of a journey for then onwards, but I did get there, Declan.
Yeah.
We had desire to drink, and it just all happened. It just all happened. Call it universal intelligence, call it whatever you want. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I've done it. I don't matter. I don't care. It worked. It just worked, and that took me into rehab. And then throughout the journey, the concept to thoughts, feelings, and behaviour, to coming out and meeting a librarian who met John. John moved to the rehab, and then I got introduced to the 12-step recovery programs, and within that there were spiritual principles and all that stuff, and basically what spiritual principles is just be kind and love your neighbour. Just be normal. That's it. That's what you need to be. Focus. I'm feeling really spiritual today, and I'm like, you're definitely not spiritual then, you wouldn't say it. Oh, I'm feeling spiritual today, and I'm like, all right, okay, don't mean if you're spiritual, wouldn't say it. You just be kind to somebody. You don't look, you don't need to, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? And I get the people who say to me, okay, if I'm not feeling spiritually well today, and I know there's stuff going on for them. Do you know what I mean? So there's terms you can use and stuff like that. But to be that, it's for me, it was all about kindness in life, and all that happened off the back of that. Change happened then, and that's why I think that getting into schools. Why did it take to 40-year-old for me to get that, or somebody to say that to me when it could have been told to me earlier? So that's why I talk about that in schools and education, and the feedback's been phenomenal. To You can't measure the impact. You really can't measure it, but it works.
But like you, like with you with the guy talking about the snowball, if you can connect with one person, one child that stops them going down the route of using substance as a coping strategy and then ending up in the jail or, becoming an armed robber, then it feels like the job's done. It's almost that if you can do, one person, but I know you've talked in loads of primary schools as well as high schools, and so you talked about questions that you and your peer group asked that man at that time. Is there any questions you've been asked where you thought, wasn't expecting that, but because I know you always give an honest answer. That's something that I really admire about you. No matter who you're speaking to, you'll speak to them as human beings, as people, and if they're willing to ask the question, you'll grace them with an honest answer as well. So, is there anything that you've come across that you've been asked questions and you thought, oof, it's a good one?
Do you know what? I think the most recent, and I'm going back, was it this year? And it was a powerful, powerful question. It was such a paradox to it because it was such a simple question again. And it was in Octorada school.
Mm-hmm.
And I presented to S2s and 3s, 3 and 4, I think, S2, 3 and 4. It doesn't matter. But out of each year group, we done like I will always do a Q&A with an audience and do a Q&A to get questions and stuff. And folk who don't want to ask questions will give just write in a post-it note, and ever who's with me can read out some of the questions. And a lot of them are quite repetitive as well, and similar questions like, but this one question came out and said, "Are you okay today?" And that hit me.
Wow.
That hit me, and I was like, wow. So they've sat and listened, and they're like, wow. And somebody must have took in, like, I wonder if he's all right telling all that, which I took for this. But the question he asked me was, "Are okay today?" I said, "Ever who asked this question, thank you. And I'll answer you by saying, I'm okay, and thanks for asking me that." But what I would encourage everybody to do here is to take this question and ask each other it daily. Are you okay today? And do that. And that was probably I've had questions, but sometimes the kids have taught me, if we're open to learning, sometimes the kids can say things that teach us something. And that kid, whoever, I was the S1, then S2, there was the same question came up again, "Are you okay today?"
Really?
So it was there, S3, "Are you okay today?" And we had that kind of like, wow. And it just showed you where these kids were. And the other interesting one was when I did, which sort of kind of validates what I'm saying or what the message I'm trying to convey across. But one was just a message to, like, some kids would write and say thank you or share stuff and thanks for sharing that. And they would have you comment. But two or three kids mailed back to me saying, "Thank you for telling us or sharing what you shared today, and I will never judge any of my students the way I have done in the past. I've had quite a good life and didn't realise that some of these students don't have the same life as me, and I'll never treat them like that again." And that was powerful as well to hear, And I think the first one, Declan, was I've been the first in the primary school. When I'd done the primary school, and I really didn't think, because of the age and I'm older and all that, and they say if you're older you're wiser and that, but I just felt I wouldn't get a connection with primary school kids, and I got a massive connection, and I didn't want to talk about crime and violence and drugs and jails and police and all that, so I'd done a different input, but then done a Q&A, and they kids asked me, "Have you been violent? Have you been in trouble with police? Have you took drugs? Have you been in jail?" And I'm like, because I didn't realise their parents or relatives had the same life as mine, and they were growing up how I was growing up as a wee boy, starting school in Govan, and then that allowed me, because I was always scared that I might be asking or telling kids stuff I shouldn't be telling them. So I was, that boundary thing, you don't want to scare kids, you don't want to glamorise, you don't want to. It's a hard gig to do, to make sure you're getting a message across that isn't going to have any emotional impact on kids. However, when they start hitting me with the questions, I know it's not okay to answer, because they're experiencing it, and that was the key. But it was Emma. I'll never forget Emma as long as I live. It's just her name and who she was, and I was given child protection training and all that as well. Know how to do with a disclosure. What do you do with a disclosure and stuff? Anyway, Emma wrote me. I got these letters, and it was Emma. And I always wondered, would these kids get it in my 40s, mid 40s? These kids going to get me? And Emma wrote to me and said, "Kevin, thank you for coming to our school, telling your story today. You told my story. I'm not alone anymore." And I was like, wow. And even when I say that, I get emotional. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, she's related to me because she's living it, but then she got hope. then she got hope she doesn't. It's not always going to be like that. And she got the hope, and that was it. And that really, really stuck with me. And what had happened is my son played, because I tell a story about my son, and I tell a story about how I disconnected him as a 2-year-old and all that, blah, blah, blah. It's interesting. The twos have actually done workshops on this. And he plays guitar and he sings and he's amazing. He's amazing. He's my best pal. He's 28. He's a beautiful, love him to bits. And the twos are just really good mates today and stuff. I'm very close with his mum still as well. Like, you know, again, relationships, Declan, you know, relationships, staying strong. And so all the kids would say, what about your son? What about your son? And that. So I went back to the end of the time at the school and the year they were having this big get together. So they'd made a play about Kevin. They made a film about Kevin. They made they'd done different projects. They'd done this big poster and Kevin's story. It was really interesting.
Wow.
And what they'd done is they drew my story like a cartoon strip, and they'd done it on black and white. And when I turned my life around about, they'd done it on colour. It was beautiful.
Wow.
How did the mind do them doing this? But when they were presenting this and their families all came as well, it was quite a great project to be involved in Edinburgh. So what I done was I brought my son along and I introduced my son to them to let them know this is for still here today and talk about the daddy that was there for his son and all that. And so Kevin played a few songs for them. And then Emma came up to me and she went, and I was standing talking, she came up, she went, have you got time? And I was like, what? She went, have you got time? And I thought, she's going to disclose something to me. I panicked. I'm like, Emma, of course I've got time. What I'm trying, like, what did I do here? But she might speak to me in the rain. She's 10 or 11. And I'm like, of course I've got time for you, Emma. What do you want to ask me? And she's like, can your son come up and play in our classroom for us? We've got golden time and we want to spend it on your son playing for us. I was never so glad she said that to me. You know what I mean? So,
wow.
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was great for the kids and that. And hopefully they grow up remembering that and they will. I met a wee girl in the secondary school who was in that primary school and she was doing pretty well for herself. And I didn't even recognise her. She remembered me.
Right.
You know, so yeah, so no, it was good. It's good doing it. I'm blessed to get to do that.
It's a real gift, Kevin, you know, and I know sometimes, I mean, you've been through all the stuff you've been through in life and you talk about, and we've not even got on to the work you do with Aid Abet really at the moment, but the impact there, even in that group, you know, in that wider school, you know, the cartoon, the story, the video, the play, and what you've taught there as a whole school to be trauma-informed, trauma-aware and aware of ACEs, you know, through your story, and they've used that as a channel. So, I mean, it's a phenomenal gift you've given, you know, probably 1,200 kids in a school.
And do you know, see during that time as well, Declan, what they've done is, see when they'd done the play, there was 3 Kevins. They'd done 3 Kevins in this play because they just created it. They took they had the story and then they all took part of the story to create a wee project and they were going to present it at the end of the year. And I'd go back every couple of months to see how they were all doing and stuff. And the police were really doing that as well. And but what I found interesting, it wasn't about the story, it was the part they wanted to play. The part they wanted to play. And there was a part of my story where I talked about as a wee boy growing up as a bedwetter in my house, you know what I mean? And even my brothers as well, you know, but we were all, it was that embarrassing, shameful thing that it was no something you done intentionally. You just woke up, your bed was wet, it was chaos. And I spoke about that fear and that terror and shame and guilt attached to all that, right? And I remember one of the wee boys at the school wanted to play that role. And for me, he was getting to act out and knowing it was safe to say something. That's what I took for it. You know what I mean? He just wanted to, and I thought that was powerful, how they took the story and what they identified with and how they wanted to fit it, like similarities to their lives. And that was a very, very powerful point when a wee guy being left taking drugs and stuff like that, you know, and then Kevin had turned his life around about. So then Kevin's wee boy growing up, Kevin causing chaos, and Kevin turned his life around about. They had the 3 Kevins and it was a great experience, and to watch the kids take it on and have ownership of the story and make it into their own, you know what I mean? So it was great.
It's amazing. And you've touched on Aid Abet, you know, and I would be keen to go back to it because it's a massive part of your life now, you know, and the work that you've done. That's been that transformational stuff that you continually continue to give, you know, through all the traumatic experiences in your life. You've seemed to have turned them around to be something positive for others, you know, in the process of doing it for yourself. And you know, you introduced yourself as the founder of Aid Abet, but you know, tell me what Aid Abet is. You know, where did that vision come from? Because you know, most of these organisations, like the one that I set up as well, it comes with a vision for change. So I suppose what did you want to change and why did you set it up?
Actually, so really the whole story behind Aid Abet was Scottish Churches House in Action had a guy called Craig working from. Craig was a lifer. He finished a life sentence. He was working in his churches, and he had a vision. He had the vision that if he could get the money, he'd want to support guys coming out of prison homeless. And that was what he was wanting to do. So Scottish Churches House in Action, the CEO was Alistair Cameron at the time. He took that, and I think they got a lot of funding for the Scottish Government to create a sort of mentorship programme to support prisoners coming out of prison. Mm-hmm. And as they got that, this was Craig's dream, but unfortunately Craig, his life was taken from him as well. So he met his ways due, they always thought murderers end up getting murdered and stuff like that. But yeah. I'd never met Craig, never knew who he was. But anyway, this is the story we'd heard, and he wanted to set something up. So Alistair Cameron came to a treatment centre, the rehab, looking for people to get involved in it. And I heard about it and went along to the first meeting. And it started for there, but we spent months, like 10 months, sitting on tables talking about what it would look like. And it was based on homelessness. And we were saying that this is bigger than homelessness. We've all been homeless, but we've been drug addicts, we've been mental health, we've been, there's loads of high employability, unemployment, there's all that. You come out to jail with all that. So we then started, and we called ourselves prison mentors at the time. But then it was solely designed to be a standalone charity eventually. So Scottish Churches were bringing us together for to set us up to then become a charity of our own, peer-led, and that's how it was. So there was about 12 or 13 years to begin with, and then we looked at the discussions, we were doing all this stuff, and this is when the relationship building was happening with the contact the prisons, with the letters to come in. And then we thought about what we're going to call the charity, how we're going to get the name for it. So we then went, we had all these mad names fired about, right? But Alistair Cameron for the Scottish Churches told us that Craig, who initially wanted it set up and then was murdered and died himself, he said if we ever going to set up, he'd called it Aid Abet. So in his memory, though we never met him, we contacted his mother and his sister and we said, look, this is the story, and we never met Craig, but we're going to launch a charity in February 2016, and we would like to call it Aid Abet in his memory. And they were, yeah, absolutely. And that's where it came. The name came for. It was for Craig. And actually, my first gate pickup was a guy called Craig as well.
Wow.
And unfortunately, he died and all. So there's been a lot of tragedies on the road, as that's what we've had the experience. That was where we were saying, pick them up for the gate. And I always went on that 72 hours because if it was in 72 hours, I'd relapsed. And many people had relapsed back into, when I say relapse, I'm saying relapse back into offending behaviour, crime and substance use. Yep. Any one of them, you've just come back into it within these 72 hours. So we said if we can support people who are the first 72 hours, for the gate, especially on a Friday, services that shut at 5. We know crisis happens after 5 at night, so we want it to be 24/7. So we're still the day we're 24/7 available if anybody wants us, especially our weekends. Just for the emotional support, Declan. It's just for the emotional support, and if we get to somebody for a coffee, and loneliness and depression and suicides and all that. So that's what lifeline is, that phone call for us. Picking guys up for the gate and reducing the pressure of the house and the benefits, the GP, helping them through that process, reducing the stress that they don't need to go and use a substance. So we set up with that, and we didn't have a clue what we were doing, and that's the truth, right? We knew what we were doing to support people, but we didn't know how to run as a charity. We didn't know about the finance. We didn't know about funding, how to get money. We didn't know about collecting data and analysis reports. We'd done no paperwork. We just wanted to help people. That was it. We just wanted to help people, and it's came back to bite us, actually. So that was us. We got some funding here and there. As I say, the police came in and seconded myself and Donald to the Police Scotland project, so that paid us. We're all volunteers. And that was my first paid job, and Donald's first paid job for a long, long time. And it was with the police, and they got the funding through the Violence Reduction Unit. So the Violence Reduction Unit paid their salary for a year. And then the following year, they paid it for half a year along with a lottery funding and then council and stuff. And so it's been like that. Yeah. But the volunteers, I designed the training programme, which I still deliver today. It's been revamped and stuff like that. And the training is just all based on, safety, communication, boundaries, blah, blah, how we conduct ourselves, how we act, keep yourself safe, but keep the people you support safe and all that as well. But leading up to COVID, I'm very proud to say this. We never measured it. We never measured how many gate pickups we've done. We never measured how many people we picked up for the gate. And we never measured how many volunteer hours. We never done any of that, right? But what we did keep a hold of the fact is, because you can't lose it, is the previous 36 volunteers who came to Aid Abet, like myself, who'd been in prison, in addiction, chaos, didn't really feel you got a job again anyway because you're judged, stigmatised and judgment and discriminated against. People came in, Aid Abet, went on with different courses we get them involved in. They were doing gate pickups or supporting people in the community. They started finding something within themselves. And they 36 people were employed today with other organisations, and they went on to do other things. And I'm talking big roles and high up places now. But they done that. That wasn't due to us or me. I was due to them finding their own way. They found it through Aid Abet. And then when COVID came, we lost everything. And then September last year, they got some funding, and I was offered, well, I could have stayed at the VOW project for the next 3 years, secure for the next 3 years, funded for the next 3 years, or take a gamble, come back to Aid Abet for a year and try and get the charity back up to where it used to be again. And today I've got 14 new volunteers, we've had umpteen referrals, people supported, we've got people into rehab, we've got people, we've just done that, we've done what we set up today. I was given a year to do it. Sometimes a business will fold within a year, sometimes people just break even in a year of the first year of business. I went in and it was only doable because of relationships.
Yeah.
It was only doable because knowing people like yourself, Declan, and everybody else that believe in what we do, which has helped us get to this point. So now we've got 14 new volunteers on board. We're interested in doing other new projects. Again, and he's funded. Everybody will applaud Aid Abet for hours, but they'll put their hand in their pocket and say, "We'll pay you for what you do." And we'll keep, but we know that the volunteers we've got today will grow and will move on. In fact, I know now that we're ready to lose one of our volunteers to another big organisation right now while I speak, and that's all right. That's all right, because that's good. That's where I want to go, because I know we'll never be able to fund them or keep them a job. But it's low we give the people coming out of jail hope and life and that. But actually, the volunteers get to grow as well. We all get to grow. We've had guys who have been picked up for the gate who came on board as Aid Abet mentors, who were guys who were still on parole and doing big sentences. We recalled back to prison. We fought to get them out of prison. They came out. They joined Aid Abet. Guys are married today, got kids today, working the youth projects today in Edinburgh. But that's credit to them. That's not Aid Abet or me. That's credit to them because it's the choices they made. They got new people in their circle. They built better relationships. And that, as we're talking about, is all about that relationship thing, you know what I mean? And that's the thread that goes right through everything, you know what I mean? Relationships with care, compassion, kindness, and love for others. And I'll use the word love, and the term love, as a form of action towards others, you know.
And I know you're saying that that's down to the work that they're doing, but and you're right, you're absolutely right. But everything's a learned behaviour, so that had to be picked up somewhere. And I think you leading from that example and showing that, look, this is doable. This is something that can happen, will happen, but it's going to be hard, and it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to dig your heels in some night. Some night you're going to you might feel like you might relapse, and that's when you really dig deep. But that's your testament to that example. So although they have to go on that journey and come to that end part, or that continual journey part themselves, someone has to be there, whether it's yourself or another one of the workers that picks them up, and they lead from that behaviour, they learn from that behaviour. So, I think it's give yourself the credit, I think, in the work that you're doing, because it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think for us, it's like, for me especially, and I think it's no the good times. For me personally, it's not the good things that are happening. It's dealing with the difficult times that come up. And that's when you call in and you look at your relationships for that backup, because it's like, it's never been easy. I say it like, we can talk about all the good stuff, but I lost count of many people who, didn't make it. You know what I mean? And I'm talking young people. When I was in the Police Scotland project, the amount of young people that died prematurely. The drug death numbers just came out there at 1,700 and whatever, and it's going to get bigger and stuff like that. And services, and they're shouting about playing services, and I keep saying, but why do you want to create services for your kids at 10-year-old today to go into in the future?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're doing. Why don't you put all that money for services and put into the prevention work and build kids' hopes, dreams and aspirations and give them opportunity in life? Because if they're getting the opportunity out there, and if you keep cutting, if the government, it's nuts, it's a paradox. It's like, we're cutting to save money, but we're actually going to cut these services, cause kids to have nothing, then the only way to make money is to either selling drugs or get involved in crime, right? It's all they're going to have, right? And then use the government and the Scottish Prison Service are going to have to house them. And it's going to cost you £57,000 a year for each one of them for a year in prison. That's what they're doing. And nobody's listening. They're not listening. They don't get it. Rather than just flung all the money. When Hamza Yusuf, before he was First Minister, and that, and I spoke with him one time, and I spoke to a lot of ministers, and I was saying, every single mother, expectant mother, should be given free rent, free utility bills, free everything, and give 3 years to love her kid.
Yeah.
And I guarantee it's the best investment you ever give, because that kid will then grow and will be resilient regardless of what happens after that.
Yeah.
It'll be resilient enough to go through life. They might not head down that road, you know what I mean? But let mothers love their kids, because the day mothers are not getting to love their children. Do you know what I mean? They're not getting to love their children under the stress and trauma. And I link back to my mum and dad back in the 60s with the chaos and what went on in their life. Mothers are living that today, and this is 2024.
Yeah.
Stress, financial stresses, burdens and all that. And that's the issue that I see happening. And the solution is invest money in their dreams.
Absolutely. You know, and it's exactly what you're talking about there, because we've talked about relationships for quite a bit here, and the informative relationships and the underpinning of relationships happens in your formative years between kind of almost pre-birth right up to the age of kind of 2 or 3. So that pivotal period there that you're talking about, you know, that's whenever that connection is made or broke, and the, you know, the attachment theory would dictate that depending on what attachment then you create in that period in time will determine the rest of your life, you know, and all the relationships that you have.
I have the evidence from my own family, right? So here it is, right? Here's the attachment. This is how it works, right? So this takes away blame, shame, and guilt and all that, right? So I've got 5 brothers and 3 sisters who all experienced the same as me, right? Only 2 is ended up in drug addiction and drug addictions and criminality. In fact, 2 is actually spent time in jail together.
Right.
The 2 have took drugs together. He's the result of the ACE study. He's had cancer, lung disease, and heart disease, and blood infections, and he's right. So there's me and him, right? Right. Here's the thing. He has a twin brother who's never took drugs, never been in prison, never done anything like that, right? So let's go back to him.
Yeah.
What happened to him? His trauma happened in the womb. He was born 2.5 pounds. He was put in an incubator for 6 weeks. Never got no skin to skin or touch from my mum or anything like that. His brain was badly damaged, no hingweed, right? And then he was brought up with none of this knowledge and experience, and then he left to navigate the world.
Yeah.
What happened to me? So I'm like, well, what's happened to me? And I had to look at my life and my family, right? So see the first 4 older siblings. My dad was in the Royal Navy for 18 years, right? So my mum was in a secure, safe home in Queensferry when my dad was based in the Rosyth dockyard at that time, right?
Yeah.
So there's 4 of them, right? They've done their 1,000 days. They've got the connection. They're doing fine. And he comes out the Navy. And when he comes out the Navy, as he's coming out the Navy, the 2 twins are born. One's the 2.5 ton. But he's come out the Navy with nothing. So they've now got a set of twins. They're moving back to Glasgow. And they go into an environment, there's 1-bedroom flat. And I'm brought in. Right? Right, so my mum's not got enough time to love me. It's the only theory I can work with. She was there for me. She loved me, but she didn't get. She had these 2 twins, and then the other kids above than me, and the stress and everything else that was going on. And then as my younger sister was born, we moved for that environment into another. So the environmental, if you look at all the environmental side, there has been born in this trauma there, and that's what evidence. And that's just in my family. I can see that the attachment. Do you know what I mean? It's evident, it's there. And that's where I would say, if somebody says, so it wasn't domestic violence, and it wasn't drugs, and it wasn't this, although many things, I've always believed it was an attachment thing. Do you know what I mean? It was an attachment thing for me. I believe that might have been the case. No intentional from my mother.
Yeah.
No intentional. I was up seeing her last night, actually. We were watching them, we're doing that together. She's 80 odds, and she loves me talking about this stuff, because she says, Kevin, we've been robbed of this information. She gets it. See, I talk to her about stuff I've done and stuff like that. She's massively proud of me and that, like, you know what I mean? And stuff. And same with my dad before he passed away. I knew he was dying. We knew we got to see cheerio him and that, which a lot of people don't get the privilege of doing, but we got to. And his last words from me was, just keep doing what you're doing, son. Just keep doing what you're doing, you know. And my man, my man says, I wish we knew. She could actually see in her own life about her getting brought up, what it was like for her. She can relate the ACEs and the traumas and all that, and the effects and all that. And she can see the stuff that she went through. And if anybody says to me, who's the most resilient person you've met in your life, I'll say my mother. My mother, she gave birth to 9 children. She put up with a lot of chaos. I'm not saying she was perfect, but she put up with a lot of shit for years, and she never gave up, man. She never gave up. You know what I mean? And if that's you, I know what resilience looks like. Go and see her. You know what I mean? She could tell you a few stories, Declan. She get her on your show one time.
Oh, I know. Oh, listen, Kevin, I could talk all day. I could talk all day to you. But I'm conscious that we're coming to the end, and firstly, I want to thank you for sharing everything you've shared, about your own life and the experiences that you've had in childhood, adulthood, and also the transformations that you've helped make in young people's lives, like young Emma and young people like that in the schools. But I have a wee bit of a kind of closing tradition and reflection as well on this podcast. So I usually ask the guests at the end, if they could think about maybe that one thing that they thought was the thing that helped them take back control in their life. I know there's been lots of stuff you mentioned. Is there anything that stands out for you that you think that helped me take back control? Because it might help someone else that's listening.
Do you know that I think there's a few, because it goes. There's 3 names lying in my head, but
you can give us a few.
No, but but see when I understood that, one of the things that I realised that made me take control back was I didn't need to be full of fear anymore. You know what I mean? And somebody pointed something out to me, was fear, false evidence appearing real. And there, right? Fake everything and run, or face everything and recover. Yeah. And it was that one of the ones that got me, is just face it on, not let fear get in the way, and trust and just have faith that no matter what's going on in your life, it's happening for a reason. Don't know why, but how do I keep myself safe through that? And that's usually who's the contacts I go to, and the people like Mark, the prison officer, John Clusker, the key worker, the librarian, I wish I had a name for her. She's right in the mix, she's in between all that. I think for people to say, that, Kev, I'll love you until you learn to love yourself. Do you know what I mean? I'll be with you until you can be with yourself. And that was a big one as well. But for anybody to take away anything is never, ever give up hope. And no matter what circumstances or situation that you're in right now, it does change. And that's when I look back, and I used to think that my life was never, ever going to change. And what I will say is, in the last 10 years, I started changing my views and changing my thinking, how I viewed the world, how I saw people, how I visualised, how I felt about what I was seeing. And I changed that to a positive. That changed my life. And I feel that I've packed more positivity in the last 10 years than what I did in the last 46. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because of that, and I think that's it. And to do that early on in life is a benefit for anybody.
Yeah. Great. Well, listen, Kev, thanks very much. Thanks for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure we're going to meet again soon in real life. But thanks very much for everything.
Thanks for having me, Declan. And as I say, I've just came on and had a good conversation with you. But it's been a pleasure, and I hope it's beneficial, and I hope that it does well. But I'll see you soon anyway.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of In Session Taking Back Control. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might benefit from our discussions. For more resources and support, please visit us at Better You, and don't forget to tune in for another inspiring conversation. Until next time, take care and take back control.